How do you assess local, state, and federal efforts to tackle the issue of equity and adequacy?
I would say that we've made very, very little progress. Most of the effort to address the inequities in education really came about through the war on poverty during the Johnson administration with the enactment of Title I and what was also called the Compensatory Education Act. And that brought additional funds into schools serving poor children, but by no means equalized. And what happened is over time we've lost sight of that vision that President Johnson had, right? Which is that in order to make education a pathway to opportunity and mobility, which is what we were hoping for, you had to equalize learning opportunities. The results show that we made our greatest progress as a nation in closing gaps and in lifting up children in poverty, particularly Black and Hispanic children, during the 1970s. It came to almost an abrupt stop, and we've been stagnant and in some cases even gone behind over the last 20 plus years. I would say largely because we've ignored the need to focus on equity. Instead, what we've done is we've focused on standards and accountability. Ironically, Title I has become No Child Left Behind. And we have focused almost exclusively on measuring student achievement through standardized tests and completely ignoring the conditions under which children
And what
learn.
are some of those conditions that might help achieve greater equity and greater achievement?
Well, they're really quite obvious. The first and most important is the quality of the teacher that a student has access to. But the quality of the teacher is a reflection of funding, right? That is that if you don't pay good salaries, you can't attract or retain the best teachers. In this country, it tends to be teachers working with poor children get paid considerably less than teachers working with affluent children. And so if we really were serious about making sure that highly qualified, effective teachers were in schools for poor children, we would create incentives, we would do things that would make that work much more attractive and sustainable for teachers than we're doing right now.
What do you think some of the most effective routes to greater performance would be?
I would say in many of the schools that are struggling, there's a mismatch between the skills of the teachers and the needs of the kids, right?
And how do we ameliorate that?
Well, it sounds logical, but if the kids are struggling as readers, then the teachers need training on how to teach reading. You have large numbers of kids who are English language learners because of immigration in this country. And you have a lot of schools which have no personnel that are trained to work with English language learners, not just in learning English, but in learning math and learning science. So we're not providing the training and support that schools need to meet the needs of their students.
Does this come under the rubric of professional development?
It is professional development, but this is really a job that state departments of education should be taking on, because most of this is really a state responsibility, right? And so what the states do, they mimic the federal government. They simply say, these are our standards. If you don't meet those standards, we're going to penalize you in some way. They issue threats and warnings. They don't come in and say, look, this is what you should be doing. This is how you could serve these needs. Because, and this is what's most disturbing about it. I can name schools throughout this country that are serving all kinds of kids well. Homeless kids, kids in poverty, recent immigrants, all kinds of children. If I can do that, the state departments of education should be able to know where those schools are and should be able to tell the schools that are struggling, listen, go visit this school and see what they're doing and learn from them. This week, I was contacted by a group of educators I'd worked with in Alabama, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. They were they were a failing high school and they asked for help on what they should be doing. So I took them to a high school in Queens that's very successful and explained their journey on how they went from a struggling school to a high-performing blue ribbon school that serves an extremely diverse, low-income population, much larger than their school. And they did that in great detail, talking about the teaching and learning that went on, talking about the work that students are expected to do, how they organize themselves. On Tuesday, I took them to Brooklyn to visit another high school that is an excellent school, 100% African American. Their school is also predominantly African American. They needed to know that you can get excellent results from African American children. So they needed to see that. So if I can do that, Certainly the State Department of Education could do that.
I spoke with a researcher who posits that huge amounts of additional money have to be on the table if you want to create an effective incentive to get teachers in the highest need schools, and that the previous levels from the federal government have been inadequate. Is that a position that you find sympathetic? That the amount of money, I think you mentioned that teachers have to be paid a lot more.
That's right. That's right.
And a lot more in higher needs schools?
I mean, think about it. Right now, we do that. We do that for truck drivers in Iraq, right? Or in Afghanistan. Say, look, you're going to be going to a war zone. We're going to pay you more than you will get outside because we need people who are willing to work under those adverse conditions. Now, I don't want to call some of our schools a war zone, though sometimes safety is a real issue. But if we want to get teachers, highly effective teachers, who are going to commit to working in high poverty communities, we should reward them. We should make that work very attractive. We should really figure out how do we create a support systems so they'll be willing to stay and not just continue this churn and this revolving door.
And what other solutions might there be to making an attractive environment?
I would say that teachers want time to reflect, to plan, together, not just on their own. Teachers need time to meet with parents, to know their students. Time is one of the precious, commodities in education that I think doesn't get nearly enough attention. They should get sabbaticals like professors do, right? So they can continue their professional growth. All those things would make teaching a much more attractive profession. And it's what other countries do to make it so that your top graduates of colleges and universities want to pursue teaching. That's what we want to do. We want, instead of those kids right now that are going off to business schools and to go work for banks, we want some of them, particularly those with the right values, to choose education as a profession.
So it sounds like you feel a great deal more support of teachers from the beginning. Support in terms of respect and support in terms of practical support will be necessary in order to equalize the kind of teaching all students get.
Absolutely. I mean, the training of teachers should look like the training of doctors. Right? If you think about the way we prepare doctors to work in hospitals, is they work under an experienced physician, often for a year or more. They're not even allowed to touch a patient without a physician present. And a lot of what they learn by watching, they learn by reflecting on what's going on, by debriefing and processing, so that you don't just throw a brand new doctor into a challenging situation. We wouldn't do that in healthcare. We do that in teaching. We take brand new, inexperienced teachers and give them the most difficult assignments, right? Teacher America makes that their strategy, which is crazy. Why would you take the least experienced people? It doesn't matter if they're good college students. The least experienced people give the most challenging kids to teach. Show me the research to support that.
So you want shoulder-to-shoulder support in a really meaningful way.
That's right. So I want colleges of education to send their faculty into the schools with those new novice teachers to work with them, to help them, so that it's not just the new teacher trying to figure it out, but they've got the support of an experienced researcher and educator who's there with them, thinking through, okay, how do we engage these students? How do we address their learning needs? Those are big questions that a novice teacher should not be expected to answer on their own.
There's another change afoot, in as much as originally when No Child Left Behind said that minority children and poor children shouldn't end up with the least experienced teachers or children or teachers who are not certified, that was the standard. And now performance measures are being used to judge effectiveness. What do you think about this shift and what will best serve children in terms of how teaching is assessed in schools?
Well, we absolutely need to assess teaching. But the idea of using a student test score to make a judgment about a teacher, there's absolutely no research to support that as a strategy. We don't even know what the test score means, the result from the kid. We don't know if that kid worked as hard as they could. We don't know if they understood the questions, right? So then how are you going to, we don't know if the test score is even an accurate reading of what a child can do and their ability. How are we going to then use that test score to then make a judgment about a teacher? So I think the alternative is, having people who are experienced educators go into classrooms, observing teachers, observing teaching and learning, because they also need to observe the students, and making informed judgments about whether or not, what kind of support that teacher needs, and whether or not that teacher is suited to be a teacher. It should not be the case that teaching is a job for life if you're no good at it.